When Ethan told me to pack my things and leave, it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. His whole family was sitting there, watching me like I was a show they had paid to see. His mother had that smug smile on her face, the same one she always wore when she thought she'd won. Ethan's words were cold and sharp. "You're worthless, Megan. I'm done pretending." My hands were shaking, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I had already cried enough behind closed doors to fill an ocean. I looked at him for a long moment, not saying a word. Then, I turned around and slowly walked upstairs. Every step felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I started packing the essentials, my clothes, my documents, my peace. I didn't need to argue or beg. I already knew how this night would end. Ethan followed me upstairs, muttering something about how I had nothing without him, how he made this life for us. I almost laughed. For years, I had worked extra hours to help pay the bills while he jumped from one business idea to another. He never once asked how the mortgage got paid on time. He never once wondered why the bank called me, not him, about payments. He didn't know the house was mine. He never cared enough to look. When I was done packing, I picked up a small white envelope from the drawer, the one I had been saving for this exact moment. I walked back downstairs, quiet and steady. His family was still sitting around the table, whispering like vultures waiting for a final meal. I placed the envelope right in the middle of the table. Ethan frowned. "What's this?" he asked. I met his eyes and said, "That's the house deed. You might want to take a good look before you tell me to leave again." He blinked, confused, then pulled out the papers. His face changed color as he read the name printed in bold, Megan Carter. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. His mother's smirk disappeared. His father looked away. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I stood there, calm, finally in control. "You have 1 hour," I said quietly. "The locks will be changed tonight." Then I picked up my bag, looked around the house one last time, and walked out. The night air felt different. It didn't sting anymore. It felt like freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what would happen next. I didn't need revenge that came with yelling or chaos. My revenge was simple: walking away from the pain with my head held high, leaving him behind in a house he thought was his. He kicked me out thinking he had won. But the truth, when I first met Ethan, I thought I had found everything I'd ever wanted. He was charming in a quiet way, the kind of man who could make you feel like you were the only person in the room. He talked about big dreams, starting his own business, building a future where we wouldn't have to worry about money again. I believed him. Back then, I believed everything he said. We met at a friend's barbecue. He was funny, confident, and had this way of talking about life like he already had it all figured out. I was working as a nurse at the time, doing long shifts and saving every penny I could. Ethan said he admired that about me, that I was hardworking and independent. I didn't know then that those were the same traits he'd later use against me. When we started dating, things moved fast. Within a year, we were living together in a small apartment downtown. He had just quit his job to focus on his startup. I supported him because I thought that's what love meant, being there when things were hard. I picked up extra shifts, paid the bills, and covered rent while he worked from home, surrounded by piles of notebooks and ideas that never seemed to go anywhere. Eventually, he said we needed to move to a better place, a house, somewhere we could grow into our future. I was hesitant, but he was so sure. He found a house in the suburbs, a nice 2-story place with a white fence and a small garden. I still remember how proud he looked when we stood outside for the first time, holding hands, imagining our life together. He didn't know that I had handled all the paperwork myself. When it came time to buy the house, the loan and deed went under my name. It wasn't planned as revenge or control. It was practical. My credit score was stronger, my income more stable. Ethan didn't argue. He just said, "Whatever you think is best, babe." I took that as trust. Looking back, it was just indifference. For the first few months, everything felt perfect. He'd make breakfast sometimes, talk about his dreams, and tell me he couldn't wait to give me the life I deserved. I worked hard, believing we were building that dream together. But slowly, things began to shift. His words got sharper, his temper shorter. I'd come home tired after 12-hour shifts, and he'd complain about the smallest things. Dinner being late, bills piling up, how his life wasn't where he wanted it to be. I'd remind him we were a team, but he stopped listening. I started realizing that I wasn't helping him build a future. I was holding one together by myself. At that time, I still thought things would get better. I didn't know that the same house we stood so proudly in front of would one day become the stage for my humiliation. And his biggest mistake was he had just lost everything, and I had finally found peace. After the wedding, everything started to feel different. The man I had fallen in love with seemed to disappear slowly. Ethan stopped being warm and kind. The late-night talks and small surprises faded away. He became distant, cold, and always distracted. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress of marriage or money, but deep down, I could feel something changing. He started making small comments that hurt more than I let on. If I cried during a movie or got upset after a long day, he'd laugh and say, "You're too emotional, Megan. No wonder people can't handle you." I'd stay quiet, telling myself not to overreact. I thought if I just stayed calm and loving, he would see how much I cared. But the more patient I was, the more cruel he became. His mother, Barbara, made everything worse. She never liked me from the start. At our wedding, she barely smiled and told me, "A man like Ethan deserves a real woman." I laughed it off at the time, but her words stayed in my head. Every visit from her felt like an exam I was destined to fail. She would walk around our home, touching things, judging everything, from the food I cooked to the way I folded towels. Ethan never defended me. In fact, he encouraged her behavior. Whenever I tried to talk to him about how it made me feel, he'd say, "She's just being a mom, Megan. Don't be so sensitive." It wasn't about being sensitive. It was about being disrespected in my own house. But I swallowed my pride, smiled, and kept trying. I thought love was about patience, about waiting for things to get better. He began spending more time at work, coming home late with weak excuses. "Just busy with the team," he'd say, avoiding my eyes. I tried to make things easier, cooking his favorite meals, giving him space, avoiding arguments. But nothing I did was ever enough. On weekends, instead of spending time together, he'd visit his mother. Sometimes I'd offer to go with him, and he'd say, "Maybe next time." I knew what that meant. Barbara didn't want me there. I'd spend those weekends cleaning the house, pretending everything was fine, even though I felt more alone than ever. I started noticing how often he compared me to others. "Lena from work got promoted again. She's really focused," he'd say, without realizing how that crushed me. I was focused too, just on keeping our marriage alive. But he didn't see that. There were nights I'd sit on the porch, staring at the house we built, wondering when love turned into endurance. I thought about leaving sometimes, but then I'd remember the vows, the promises, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd come back to the man he once was. But the truth was, the cracks had already spread. It happened late one night when Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch. His phone kept lighting up on the table beside him, buzzing every few minutes. I tried to ignore it at first, but curiosity got the best of me. When I picked it up, I saw her name, Lena. The same coworker he always mentioned in passing, the one he said was just a friend. I opened the message, and the words hit me like a punch to the chest. "Can't wait till she's gone so we can start fresh, red heart." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The heart emoji burned into my mind. It wasn't just a fling, it was planned. He was waiting for me to leave, or worse, for a reason to push me out. I looked over at him, sleeping peacefully, as if nothing was wrong. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake, but instead, I put the phone down gently and walked away. I sat in the kitchen for hours that night. My mind was racing, but my heart felt numb. Every little thing suddenly made sense. The late nights, the cold attitude, the way he defended her when I once mentioned she seemed a little too friendly. I had asked him months ago if there was anything going on between them. He laughed and said, "You're being paranoid." Turns out, my instincts were right all along. But I didn't confront him. Not that night. I knew Ethan well enough to know that if I came at him with anger, he'd twist it, make me look like the crazy one. I needed proof, not just for me, but to make sure he couldn't lie his way out of it again. So I started paying attention. The next few weeks, I watched quietly. He'd come home late smelling of cologne he didn't usually wear. Sometimes his shirts had traces of perfume, a scent too sweet to be mine. I noticed new clothes, expensive ones, even though he claimed his business wasn't making money yet. He'd take long phone calls outside and step away when I walked near. Every time I heard him laugh softly into the phone, it was like a small cut I had to hide behind a calm smile. At work, I kept myself busy, pretending everything was normal. I didn't tell anyone. I needed time to think clearly. I started gathering small pieces of evidence, screenshots, receipts, details of his lies. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about knowing the truth completely before I decided what to do with it. Every night, I'd look at him and wonder how someone I loved so deeply could betray me so easily. He was right there beside me, sleeping in the same bed, while his heart already belonged to someone else. I told myself to stay strong, to wait, and to let him dig his own grave. Because when the moment came, I wanted him to see exactly what it felt like to lose everything. Just like he made me feel that night. Too deep. And I was the only one still trying to hold everything together. A few weeks later, Ethan told me his family was coming over for dinner. He said it like it was no big deal, but something about his tone felt off. Still, I agreed. I cooked his favorite meal, cleaned the whole house, and tried to make everything perfect. Part of me hoped maybe this dinner was a chance for things to change. Maybe he wanted to fix things. I didn't know it would become one of the worst, and strangely most freeing, nights of my life. By the time everyone arrived, the house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. His mother, Barbara, walked in like she owned the place. She didn't even say hello properly, just looked around and said, "At least you finally cleaned this place up." I swallowed my pride and smiled. His brother, Josh, made a joke about how long it had been since Ethan brought the family together. Everyone laughed, everyone except me. Dinner started off quiet. I kept my focus on the food, pretending everything was normal. Ethan acted like the perfect husband, pouring drinks and smiling for the first time in weeks. For a second, I almost believed the old Ethan was still in there somewhere. But as soon as dessert came out, I saw that same cold look in his eyes. Something inside me knew what was coming. He stood up, holding his glass, and cleared his throat like he was about to make a toast. Everyone went silent. Then, with a half-smile, he said, "Megan, I think it's time you pack your things and leave. I'm done pretending." For a few seconds, the room didn't move. His mother clapped her hands like she had just watched her son win a prize. His brother laughed out loud, whispering something under his breath. Ethan just stood there, proud of himself, like he had just done something brave. I didn't react. I just sat there, staring at him. Not because I was shocked, but because I was done feeling anything for him at all. The pain that used to tear me apart wasn't there anymore. I just felt calm, a strange, steady calm. Barbara leaned forward with a satisfied smile. "It's about time," she said. "You need someone who knows your worth, Ethan." I almost laughed. She didn't know that her words would soon turn into the biggest embarrassment of her life. Ethan kept talking, saying things about how it's not working, how I never supported him enough. I didn't interrupt. I didn't cry. I just listened until he was done. Every word he said only made my silence stronger. When he finally sat down, I looked at him and smiled softly. "If that's what you want," I said. He looked confused for a moment, expecting me to beg, to fight, to break down. But I didn't. I stood up, started clearing the plates, and said quietly, "I'll get my things." He didn't know it yet, but that night, the one he thought would be his victory, was the night I took everything back. I went upstairs without saying a word. My steps were slow, but my mind was clear. I had played this scene in my head before, just never thought it would happen in front of his whole family. The house was quiet now, except for the faint sound of dishes clinking downstairs and Ethan's heavy footsteps following behind me. I opened the closet and pulled out a small suitcase. I didn't bother taking much, just a few clothes, my documents, and the small jewelry box my grandmother had given me. Everything else felt meaningless now. While I folded my clothes, Ethan stood by the door, still talking. His voice was low but sharp. "So this is how it ends, huh? You think walking away makes you better than me?" he said. I didn't answer. He took a step closer. "You should be grateful I put up with you this long." I could feel the anger in his tone, but I didn't let it touch me. He wanted a reaction, something to make him feel powerful again. I wouldn't give him that. I zipped up the bag and turned to him, calm as ever. He sneered. "Where do you even plan to go? You've got nothing, Megan. Nothing without me." That's when I almost laughed. He really believed his own lie. For years, he had lived off my work, my effort, my stability, and still thought he was the one in control. I picked up a small white envelope from the dresser. It had been sitting there for months, sealed and ready. I never thought I'd need it like this, but deep down, I always knew the day might come. I walked past him toward the door, and as I did, I handed him the envelope. He looked down at it, confused. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, his voice suddenly quieter. "You'll see," I said simply. He followed me downstairs, still holding the envelope. His family was waiting in the living room, their eyes wide, unsure what was happening. I set my suitcase near the front door, and stood by the table. Ethan tore open the envelope, pulling out the papers inside. I watched his face as he read the words, the house deed, with my name printed clearly on every line. At first, he looked like he didn't understand what he was reading. Then his face went pale. "What is this?" he whispered. I met his eyes. "That's ownership," I said softly. "This house isn't yours, Ethan. It never was." Barbara stood up, angry and confused. "You're lying," she snapped. But Ethan didn't move. He just stared at the paper, his confidence crumbling right there in front of everyone. I picked up my bag, took one last look around the home I had built piece by piece, and smiled faintly. The storm had already passed, and now, all that was left was calm. Because sometimes, the calmest silence holds the loudest revenge. When we came back downstairs, the room fell quiet. Everyone looked at us, probably expecting tears or a fight. Ethan still had the papers in his hand, but he hadn't said a word yet. His mother, Barbara, was standing near the table with her arms crossed, clearly proud of what she thought her son had done. His brother had that same smug grin. They had no idea what was about to happen. I walked straight to the center of the room and pointed at the papers in Ethan's hand. "Go ahead," I said. "Read what it says." He frowned and glanced down again, scanning the document. His face changed the moment he saw my name printed at the top. He blinked a few times, then looked back at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "What is this?" he finally asked. I took a slow breath and said calmly, "That's the house deed. The one with my name on it. So, next time you decide to kick someone out, make sure it's not the person who actually owns the place." For a few seconds, no one moved. You could feel the silence in the air. Barbara's jaw dropped, and her smug expression disappeared. Ethan's brother tried to make a joke, but it died halfway out of his mouth. Ethan just stood there, pale and frozen, still holding the papers like they might change if he looked long enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word I said hit harder because of how quiet I was. "You've been living here, eating here, sleeping here, in my house," I continued. "I paid for it. I built it. And you never cared enough to even ask whose name was on the deed." Barbara finally found her voice. "You can't be serious. This is Ethan's home." I turned to her and said softly, "No, Barbara. This is my home. Your son made that clear when he told me to leave. So now, I'm just giving him what he asked for." Ethan's hands trembled as he tried to speak. You can't just throw me out." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Actually, I can. And I will." The look on his face said everything: confusion, disbelief, and then fear. The arrogance that had once filled him was gone. His mother didn't know what to do. She looked between us, waiting for him to say something that would fix it. But there was nothing left to fix. I reached for my suitcase near the door and paused. "You have 1 hour," I said quietly. "The locks change tonight." Then I turned toward the exit. As I walked away, I could still hear Barbara whispering in disbelief and Ethan trying to catch his breath. For the first time since I had met him, he wasn't the man in control. And as the door closed behind me, I realized something. I hadn't just. Ethan stood there, completely frozen, his face pale as he tried to process what had just happened. Then his voice broke through the silence. You can't do this, Megan." It came out shaky, not confident like before. He sounded scared, desperate even. I looked him right in the eyes and said, calm and clear, "Oh, I can. You have 1 hour to get out. The locks change at midnight." For a moment, no one spoke. Then chaos began. Barbara started yelling, her voice high and sharp. "How dare you treat my son like this? After everything he's done for you." I almost laughed at that. Everything he'd done for me? He had broken me piece by piece, and she had watched it happen with a smile. Ethan started pacing, running his hands through his hair, looking completely lost. "Megan, please, we can talk about this," he said, his tone suddenly soft, pretending to care. I stayed silent. I had heard that tone before, the fake sweetness he used when he wanted something. But this time it didn't work. I wasn't the same woman who once begged him to love her back. He picked up his phone and started calling Lena. I watched quietly as he tried again and again, but she didn't answer. He tried texting her too, but the messages went unread. The realization slowly sank in. The woman he threw everything away for was gone the moment things stopped being easy. His perfect plan had fallen apart, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Barbara's yelling turned into begging. "You can't just kick us out. Where are we supposed to go?" she cried. I finally looked at her and said, That's not my problem. Maybe call your new favorite girl. She seemed eager to start fresh. Her face turned red, and she went silent. Ethan dropped down on the couch, his head in his hands. Please, Megan, he whispered. Don't do this. You can't just walk away. I stood by the door, holding my bag, and said quietly, You walked away a long time ago, Ethan. I'm just finishing what you started. He didn't have a response. There was nothing left for him to say. The room that once felt heavy with his control now felt light. Free. I could feel years of pain lifting from my shoulders. I had cried enough tears for this man. There were none left to give. I looked around one last time, taking in the place that had held both my heartbreak and my strength. Then I turned back to him and said, You've got 45 minutes now. Without waiting for an answer, I stepped outside. The night air hit my face, cool and clean. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Inside that house, Ethan was finally facing the consequences of everything he'd done. And I didn't have to say another word. My silence said it all. Walked away from a bad marriage. I had walked into my own freedom. A week after everything happened, I made the decision to sell the house. It wasn't easy. That house had once meant everything to me. A dream I thought Ethan and I were building together. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every photo on the shelf had a memory attached to it. But I didn't want to live surrounded by ghosts of promises that were never kept. Letting it go felt like closing the final chapter of a painful story. The sale went through quickly. I didn't even stay to see the new owners move in. The day I signed the final papers, I walked out of the lawyer's office with a calm heart. The money I made from selling the house was more than enough to start over. For the first time in years, I had full control of my life, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. I found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it felt warm and peaceful. The first night I slept there, I didn't hear shouting or footsteps pacing the floor. Just quiet. Real quiet. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights. It felt like freedom. I didn't feel lonely. I felt light. A few days later, I started working on something new, something for myself. I had always loved decorating homes, arranging spaces, and bringing life to empty rooms. Ethan used to laugh about it, saying it was a cute hobby. But now I wanted to turn that hobby into something real. So I started my own interior design business. I called it Second Chances Designs, because that's exactly what I was giving myself. Starting from scratch wasn't easy. I spent long nights making plans, creating designs, and reaching out to people for work. But every small success reminded me that I didn't need anyone to build my future. Within months, I had my first few clients, single moms, young couples, people trying to rebuild their lives like I was. Each project felt personal. Each space I designed carried a piece of my own healing. Sometimes, when I looked at my new life, the office plants on my desk, the sketches on my wall, the peace in my mornings, I thought back to that night in the old house. The version of me who walked away with just a suitcase would have never believed I'd come this far. I didn't sell the house to erase the past. I sold it to make room for my future. Ethan thought kicking me out would break me, but all it did was set me free. Now, every time I hand over a finished design to a happy client, I remind myself, this is what real rebuilding looks like. That house once represented everything I lost. Now my business. Months passed, and life slowly started to feel normal again. My business was growing, I had new clients, and I was finally at peace. Every morning, I woke up excited to work, to create, and to live without fear or sadness. The pain that once felt endless had turned into strength. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, especially not to Ethan. One sunny afternoon, I stopped by my favorite coffee shop after meeting a client. I was standing in line, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a voice behind me. It was faint but familiar. When I turned, I saw him, Ethan. He looked nothing like the confident man I used to know. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes carried the weight of regret. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. He froze when he saw me. Then he gave a small, awkward smile and said, "Megan, you look good. How have you been?" I could tell he was trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked a little. There was guilt written all over his face. I didn't feel anger or pain. Just calm. A calm so deep it almost surprised me. I looked him straight in the eye and said softly, "I've been great, actually. Thank you for kicking me out. It's the best thing that ever happened to me." He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. He just stood there, silent. The man who once shouted at me in front of his family couldn't even meet my gaze now. For a brief moment, I saw what karma looked like. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and clear. I picked up my coffee, smiled politely, and walked out. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, the sun felt warm on my face, and I realized that I wasn't just free from him. I was free from the version of myself that tolerated less than I deserved. That evening, I went home, opened the window, and watched the sunset paint the city in gold. I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who cried herself to sleep in a house that didn't feel like home to the woman who now owned her peace. Ethan's downfall wasn't my victory. My peace was. He lost everything by trying to control me, and I found everything by letting him go. Sometimes, revenge doesn't need loud words or cruel actions. It's simply choosing happiness when they expected you to fall apart. I didn't need to ruin his life. Life had already done that for him. All I needed to do was live mine, fully, joyfully, and without regret. And as I sipped my coffee that night, I smiled to myself, knowing that the best revenge was never destruction. It was rebuilding, beautifully and silently. Represents everything I became. And that, to me, is the sweetest revenge.